Chapter 27 Druidism and Freemasonry. Mr. Preston, in commencing his history of Masonry in England, asserts that there are convincing proofs that the science of Masonry was not unknown to the early Britons, even before the time of the invasion of the Romans. Hence, he suggests the probability that the Druids retained among them many usages similar to those of Masons, but he candidly admits that this is a mere conjecture. Footnote. Illustrations of Masonry, B4, Section 1, page 121, Oliver's edition. Hutchinson thinks it probable that many of the rites and institutions of the Druids were retained in forming the ceremonies of the Masonic Society. Footnote. Spirit of Masonry, Lecture 3, page 41. Payne, who knew, by the way, as little of Masonry as he did of the religion of the Druids, dogmatically asserts that Masonry is the remains of the religion of the ancient Druids, who, like the Magi of Persia and the priests of Heliopolis in Egypt, were priests of the sun. Footnote. Essay on Freemasonry, page 6. The learned Faber, a much more competent authority than Payne, expresses the opinion that the Druidical bards are probably the real founders of English Freemasonry. Footnote. Pagan idolatry. Godfrey Higgins, whose inventive genius, fertile imagination, and excessive credulity render his great work, the Anacalypsis, altogether unreliable, says that he has no doubt that the Masons were Druids, Q.Q.I., or Chaldei, and Chaldeans. Footnote. Anacalypsis, Volume 1, page 718. Dr. Oliver, it is true, denies that the Masons of the present day were derived from the Druids. He thinks that the latter were a branch of what he calls the spurious Freemasonry, which was a succession from the pure Freemasonry of the patriarchs. But he finds many analogies in the rites and symbols of the two institutions, which indicate their common origin from a primitive system, namely the ancient mysteries of the pagans. The theory of those who find a connection either in analogy or by succession between the Druids and the Freemasons accounts for this connection by supposing that the Druids derived their system either from Pythagoras or from the ancient mysteries through the Phoenicians, who visited Britain at an early period for commercial purposes. But before we can profitably discuss the relations of Druidism to Freemasonry, or be prepared to determine whether there were any relations whatever between the two, it will be necessary to give a brief sketch of the history and character of the former. This is a topic which, irrespective of any Masonic reference, is not devoid of interest. Of all the institutions of antiquity, there is none with which we are less acquainted than that of the Druidism of Britain and Gaul. The investigations of recent archaeologists have tended to cast much doubt on the speculations of the antiquaries of the 17th and 18th centuries. Stukely, for instance, one of the most learned of those who have sought to establish out of the stone monuments of England a connected history of Druidism, has been said by Ferguson in his work on rude stone monuments to have been indebted more to a prolific imagination than to authentic facts for the theory which he has sought to establish. The skepticism of Ferguson is, however, not less objectionable in a critical inquiry than the credulity of Stukely. There is evidently a middle way between them. Ferguson cannot deny the existence of Druids in Gaul and Britain, since the fact is stated by Caesar. He supposes that there were two distinct races in the island, the original inhabitants, who were of Turanian origin, and, being more uncivilized, were driven by the other race, who were the Celts, into the fastnesses of the Welsh hills long before the Roman invasion. Among the former, he thinks that the religion of Druidism, consisting of tree and serpent worship, may have been practiced, and he accounts for the error of the classical writers in describing the priests of the latter race as Druids by attributing it to the confounding of the two races by the uncritical Romans. Footnote: Tree and Serpent Worship, page 29. Very recently, a bold and very skeptical theory has been advanced by Dr. Ignaz Goldziher in his work on mythology among the Hebrews. Footnote: Ably translated from the German by Mr. Russell Martineau of the British Museum, with valuable additions. For the passage quoted, see page 252. Which aims at a total annihilation of Druidism as a system of secret initiation among the ancient Britons, whose Druidism was only a national religion, and attributes its invention to the modern Welsh, who created it for the purpose of elevating and strengthening their own nationality in their rivalry with the English. He says, the Cymry of Wales, becoming alive to the opposition in nationality between themselves and the English, felt the need of finding a justification of this opposition in the oldest prehistoric times. It was then first suggested to them that they were descendants of the ancient, renowned Celtic nation, and to keep alive this Celtic national pride, they introduced an institution of new Druids, a sort of secret society like the Freemasons. The new Druids, like the old ones, taught a sort of national religion, which, however, the people having long become Christian and preserved no independent national traditions, they had mostly to invent themselves. Thus arose the so-called Celtic mythology of the god Hu and the goddess Suridolu, Suridwen, etc., mere poetical fictions which never lived in popular belief. The questions involved in this difference of opinion are as yet not critically decided, and I shall therefore content myself with giving the views of the history and religion of the Druids as they have been generally received and believed, without confusing the subject with the contending speculations which have been fostered by the credulity or the imagination of one side and impugned by the skepticism of the other. The Druids, which word signifies magicians, footnote, In Anglo-Saxon, dry is a magician, and drycraft, magic, were the priests of the religion of the ancient Britons, among whom they exercised almost unlimited influence and authority. They presided over and directed the education of the youths. They decided without appeal all judicial controversies. They were exempted from all taxes and legal impositions, and whoever refused to submit to their decisions on any question was subjected to excommunication, by which he was forbidden access to the altars or the performance of religious rites, and was debarred from all intercourse with his relatives, his friends, or his countrymen. Hence, no superstition was ever more terrible than that of the priest-ridden Britons. The Druids were under the chief authority of an archdruid, which office was for life, but originally elective. They were divided into 3 orders, the highest being the Druids, below which were the prophets and the Vates, or bards. They held an annual assembly at which litigated questions were decided and new laws were made or old ones abrogated. They held also 4 quarterly meetings on the days of the equinoxes and the solstices. They permitted none of their doctrines or ceremonies to be committed to common writing, but used a cipher for their concealment. This, Caesar says, consisted of the letters of the Greek alphabet, a statement by no means probable, since it would infer a knowledge by them of the Greek language, of which we have no evidence. The opinion of Toland is more plausible, that the characters used were those of the Irish Ogham alphabet. Sir James Ware, who wrote in Latin about the middle of the 17th century, a work on the antiquities of Ireland, says that the ancient Irish, besides the vulgar characters, used also various occult or artificial forms of writing called Ogham, in which they wrote their secrets. And he adds that he himself was in possession of an ancient book, parchment filled with these characters. Footnote. Antiquities, Hiburn, Chapter 2. Their places of worship were, according to the contemporaneous authority of Caesar and Tacitus, in sacred groves. Stukely and other antiquaries of his school suppose that the megalithic monuments found in Britain, such as at Stonehenge and Avebury, were druidical temples, but Ferguson denies this and asserts that there is no passage in any classical author which connects the Druids, either directly or indirectly, with any stone temples or stones of any sort. Footnote. Rude Stone Monuments, page 20. The question remains unadjudicated, but the position taken by Ferguson seems to be supported by better archaeological evidence.